Do we think that there will be a muted cycle? Do we think the 4-year halving cycle of Bitcoin's price is going to change? I think we just want to have a discussion between the three of us about our opinions. What do we need to see happen to have a cycle change? Or do we think that the cycle will just continue? Do we think there will be a bear market coming up soon? First, let's take a look at this chart. This is the chart of the previous 3 cycles. And this bold one here at the bottom is this year's cycle. Since halving, we have a few different start abilities here at bottom. We can see that it's moved a lot similarly to the other ones. And I think this halving one actually shows that this cycle from 2020 to 2024 and the cycle from 2016 to 2022, although different in percentage, look very similar in movements. And we kind of see that this cycle may be a bit muted in scale, hasn't quite had the incredible run-ups of the past ones. I think there's lots of reason for that. And we can get into those. What do you guys think about the Bitcoin cycles?
It's kind of crazy to me that after everything that we've seen in the last 2 years, I guess a year and a half since the ETFs, that was, for me, that was the big thing, the Bitcoin ETFs. That's when Wall Street showed up. That's when the big money showed up. And it's crazy to me that we're lower than the other cycles. That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. It feels off. Something feels weird about where we are right now. I can't really explain it. I do think that the more that Bitcoin leaks into the mainstream, the more paper Bitcoin products and derivatives built on top of Bitcoin there's going to be. And I do think that that's going to have an impact in the negative on, the scarcity and therefore the value of Bitcoin. If things are being created on top of Bitcoin, that kind of defeats one of the main value adds of Bitcoin, which is its scarcity. And I do think that that has a lot to do with it this time. There's a lot more products involved with Bitcoin. And I think that that's what's kind of keeping it down. Like, it doesn't really make sense logically any other reason than that right now.
Yeah, it's also possible. So right now we're seeing that the cycle seems a little bit more muted, but it's also possible that instead of having that massive drop that we've seen in the past cycles, we don't have those drops anymore. Instead, the drops are like 30, 40%, and then maximum you get a 50% drop at some point. Whereas in the previous cycles, we had 80%, 70% drops, right? So if we could still end up in the same position. So can you pull up that chart again, Forrest?
Yeah.
We could still end up at the same position at the end of this cycle, but maybe the path is just different, right? I think that's the more important thing. We could still end up, let's say, at the end of that blue chart. What's the price at the end of that blue chart there?
The price for which cycle year?
Oh, I see it. Good. Oh, you're hovering over it. So it ended up at $741. If we look at the scale, so at the top, we were talking about this before, we were kind of confused about what's going on. So if we look at the scale, that would be the equivalent of $4 million Bitcoin.
Right. If it had the same price movements as the cycle at the end of 2016.
As that first one. Yeah. So if it does the same thing as, let's say, the second or the yellow cycle.
This orange one down here?
Yeah, so the orange one. So it ended up at 58,000. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
61,000. So if you multiply that 61,000 by 7.5 at the top, what does that give you? Because the scale isn't that accurate. It doesn't really help that much. So it would be 61,000 times 7.5. You would end up at 500K almost, 457,000.
Right.
Right. So the path is what matters. So if you look at the middle, sorry, can you hover over the middle of that yellow, the high for the yellow or the orange? Wherever the high was. I don't know where it was.
Okay. The high is basically here, it looks like.
Yeah, right there. So we see that high and then we see the bottom. So it went from 66,000 to 15,000. Maybe we don't see that 80% drop. So it does grind up slowly, but it gets to that point where maybe, for all we know, it could be above the red. At the end of it, it could be at the equivalent of $1 million.
Right. And if we actually look here at the beginning, after the halving, there was some times where it did cross over this red one.
Yeah.
So it has been moving in sync with some of these other cycles. And you're right, it could just take a few catalysts to push it up to this level again of matching the returns of these other cycles. I think one thing I'd like to address here, something Jor said, is like, yeah, it seems kind of crazy to me that as well, that we haven't seen the price move way higher. Like, it seems that it should be much higher. And there's a lot of speculation about paper Bitcoin and everything like that. But I think one thing we should recognize is the way that these big institutions like the ETFs and like these Bitcoin treasury companies acquire Bitcoin. And they do it a lot more strategically than the buyers and the participants of these previous markets. They don't just see the price going wild or some interest or some news article and just smash by a bunch of Bitcoin. And because the relative size of the market cap of Bitcoin, it has a lot of effect on it. So there's that. There's the fact that it's a much bigger market cap means that more money has to go in to affect the price. The other thing is they strategically buy it. So they're buying it and accumulating it as it's going down. And we've seen lower volatility this cycle and lower volatility to the downside. And I think that's because the buyers are Wall Street buyers. They know how to buy these things, and they know how to buy it more cheaply. And that's with patience and with algorithmically buying it on these micro and mini dips and sucking up that volatility and creating basically not as much rapid price appreciation, not as much volatility to the upside either. So I think that because the new buyers in the market here just have a way different way of affecting price with the way they buy.
You're muted.
Oh yeah, so like you said, they're not going to panic sell. I think that's the key. They're not going to panic buy either. They're just going to buy as the money goes up. So I think, as the price goes up, I think what they're going to do is they're basically going to create a floor.
Yes.
And that floor may be 50% below wherever we are. So today, maybe the lowest price that Bitcoin can go to is like 50K, 53K. At some point, it'll be double. At some point, it'll be 100K the floor. Then it'll be 200K. Then it'll be 300K. I think a lot of people are going to be disappointed this cycle. I think a lot of people are going to be very disappointed because they think Bitcoin is coming back down to like 40, 30, 25K. And even with 250,000 Bitcoin being sold by individuals and private businesses, Bitcoin still didn't do that. So how will it get to 50K when there's no sellers?
There needs to be some giant panic. And we saw a really big panic from the global markets from the tariffs, and Bitcoin dropped 30%, which is like the kind of the bare minimum for a correction with these past previous cycles. It's like 30% is like completely normal. And then like anything, like it's oftentimes 30, 50%, right? So we just barely replicated what these previous cycles do for their corrections with these massive tariff announcements and problems with bond liquidity and purchases and just so much uncertainty in the market. And Bitcoin really didn't drop as much as we would have seen it in the past. And that is because of that floor that you talked about, in my opinion. The buyers stepped in, the buyers bought all the way down, the institutional buyers did, to lower that. And then they said, you know what, 74 is as low as we're going. We're going to go higher from here. And we've bounced right back. And I think, I think if we look at some other trends, one other trend that I've been looking at is Google trends for the words Bitcoin, MSTR, Bitcoin Treasury Company, Metaplanet, Semler, these kind of things. Interest is really low. There's this divergence in price, actually, to price and interest to these things. We had sort of a more of a peak interest at the last all-time high, I believe in like November. And since then, the price has, basically gotten back to there, but the interest in Bitcoin is way lower. And Google Trends, in my opinion, represents like the plebs. It represents like the retail, and retail's not interested. So who else has stepped in to raise this price up to these levels? And in my opinion, it's institutions and ETFs and maybe even governments and things like that. And I think what happens for price to really move is retail frenzy. And I know that people will disagree with me because they say, oh, retail doesn't have any money. We're big money players now. But I think what it does is it signals to the big money players that retail is here. So let's inflate the price and buy as well. So it's sort of like more of like a signal than the actual retail money. But I think when retail comes in, it creates a frenzy for all of the buyers. And as much as the institutional buyers would like to algorithmically buy and as it goes down and all that, there comes to a point where they can't. They just have to buy it because they need to match the underlying for the spot ETFs, or MSTRs just buying all the time. And right. So there's only so much algorithmic buying they can do when retail is also bidding up the price as well. So I think that's what creates potentially in this cycle a heated price environment, or maybe a bubble, right? A bubble of inflated price, and then it comes down. You know, like not a bubble that completely pops to nothing. That isn't going to happen with Bitcoin. But I would just say a price bubble, temporary price bubble.
Yeah, even if they inflate it and it comes back down to where we are today, that is still the new floor for Bitcoin, right? Whether that's 60, 80, 100. It's a pretty big deal. I think that there's not enough people talking about that aspect of it, because that was one of the biggest concerns within Bitcoin for the first 15 years is like, is this thing going to zero? And as Saylor said, if this thing's not going to zero, it's going to 1 million. And I think that he should swap the M with a B there, because it's the same kind of thing for real. So it's interesting. I like both your perspectives there. I tend to disagree a little bit with Rajat there. I do think that looking at that chart, it seems like a coil that's just being compressed. And once that gives out, it's just going to blow, whether that's done artificially from the big players, or I think the other thing that could affect it would be the actual supply. Like if we find out how little supply of Bitcoin is actually out there right now available, because it's going to keep going down and down and down and down. And there's going to be a pinch. I don't know if it's going to be this cycle or next cycle. But even though these big boys are getting away with buying small amounts and not driving up the price, there's still only so much Bitcoin that's available. So assuming that everybody's playing honest here, or most people are playing honest here, there's going to come a time where we realize how scarce Bitcoin is. We haven't seen that yet, but it's coming. That part's inevitable to me too. And that's when I think that, in as well as people starting to understand the fact that the dollar is not worth anything. There's a lot of people every single day waking up to the reality that the fiat dollar isn't worth anything anymore. And I think that we are going to see the difference. A lot of money is going to flow from fake assets like fiat stocks, some zombie companies, and into Bitcoin, and even some non-utility assets like real estate. I think a lot of that's going to flow into Bitcoin. Timeline, I don't know whether it's going to happen in this cycle, but pretty interesting. I think the floor for me is the main takeaway, because I completely agree with you guys there. And that is a big deal in Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I think just to sum up what you said there, it's just a matter of time before the price does what we all think it's going to do, but we don't know when that's going to happen. Is there going to be a bear market? Is the price going to go up to what we think it's going to do? I think it really just is a matter of time. As much as like it pains me to say this, it is inevitable. People say, oh, nothing's guaranteed, all this, but like you really just think about what Bitcoin is, and you think about everything that's going on in the world, the fiat printers, all this, we need a neutral reserve asset like this so badly. And it's just inevitable before people understand they also need it. And then like you said, the lack of supply, there is only a certain amount of supply. There is still a lot available, and people are willing to sell at these prices. That's why we haven't just teleported up. But for how long, right? Just a matter of time before that runs out.
Yeah, at some point, there's no way to create more, because you can't sell your Bitcoin twice. Germany sold before. We had something like 250,000 Bitcoin sold by retail or by individuals. They can't sell it twice. Once they sell it, it's gone. And part of that Bitcoin is held by people who are never going to sell again, like MicroStrategy. Do you guys think that MicroStrategy is going to sell their Bitcoin?
No, they're a black hole for Bitcoin. That once it goes in there, it's never leaving. Like it's indefinitely not leaving. Like maybe one day, but it could be 50, 60, 70 years in the future. Like who knows?
But at that point, what's the point?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if there's no fiat left, then I think that it could potentially begin to leave as they pay for businesses and creating businesses, but then maybe they'll
Yeah.
accumulate more Bitcoin through operations at that point.
Right.
But so maybe it won't leave, but there's possibility of it leaving then, I would say. But right
Yeah.
now, there's no possibility of it leaving.
No, I think even looking out that far, it's like a different world, which means decades, maybe more.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal. The floor, the Bitcoin not moving. I think the other thing for retail for me that I'm kind of shocked with, I would assume since we're over 100K, I thought that was going to be a pretty big number for retail people. But I just think that life is pretty expensive for a lot of people, and there's not a whole lot of people who have money to even look into it. Like, what's the point of looking into Bitcoin if you don't have any excess cash for the month? What are you supposed to do? Just wish you could have some? So it's tough because people just don't have money right now. Life is very expensive. The people who live in the fiat world are paying dearly with this inflation that's been created through government spending and other programs. But I just don't think people have money, and I don't think they have interest in it, which is sad because what we're seeing right now is most people can't afford to buy Bitcoin. The people who can are buying as much as they can. And that gap that we had before is going to continue to grow, I think, if Bitcoin turns into what we think it is. But there's nothing that we can do about that, unfortunately. Bitcoin was never designed to be fairly distributed, and it will reward those who added enough value to be able to pay attention and took the risk into Bitcoin.
Yeah, it always comes back to being the first adopter, right? If Bitcoin will be it'll be distributed over time, and the people who adopt it first are going to be the ones who get the most. So right now, it's possible for people to get to 1 Bitcoin. It's possible for people to get to 0.1 Bitcoin, even 1 million Satoshis. Like, if you think about it, 15 years ago, the guy paid 10,000 Bitcoin for 2 pizzas, right? If he's paying 10,000 Bitcoin for 2 pizzas, how much Bitcoin do you actually think he has? He probably has 100,000 Bitcoin, maybe more than that.
At least.
Right. If he's paying 10,000 Bitcoin for how many people can do that today? Even some of the wealthiest people in the world can't do that.
Some people couldn't do that with sats. Some people still have zero sats.
Yeah. Like 100,000 Bitcoin is what? Is 10,000 Bitcoin $1 billion? 1.06 billion? I think.
Ooh, I don't know. Too tough on the fly here.
So he's basically paying like $1 billion for 2 pizzas. 1,000 Bitcoin is $10 million. 1,000 Bitcoin is $100 million. So he paid basically $1.06 billion for 2 pizzas. Back then, it was possible for him to even have 10,000 Bitcoin. Today, you can't even imagine that, right? So over time, it's the same thing. It just keeps repeating. At that time, it was 10,000, then it was 1,000, then it was 100, then it was 10. Today, most people probably can't even imagine getting to 10 Bitcoin. At some point, we're going to see people thinking the same thing about 1 Bitcoin. Then we're going to see them thinking the same thing about 0.1. At that point, we're not going to be thinking about Bitcoin. We're going to be thinking about Satoshis, right? People are going to be saying, oh, get to 10 million Satoshis whenever you can. Get to 1 million Satoshis. Get to 100,000 Satoshis. And that'll keep happening until nobody wants dollars for their Bitcoin anymore.
Yeah. Laszlo is the guy who bought those pizzas, and it happened on May 22nd. So 2 days from now is the anniversary of it as of recording. And he's a legend. He had that ad up on I think Bitcoin Talk Forum, and he actually bought multiple pizzas from people. That was just the first one, but he did that multiple times. He was one of the first like industrial miners. He like built computers specifically for mining. So we should not feel bad that he spent so much on those Papa Johns, because we're talking about him this far down the road, and he will forever be a part of Bitcoin history in such a meaningful way for buying those pizzas. I know this is beside the topic, but just shout out to Laszlo.
Well, maybe we'll release this on the 22nd, then. That seems like a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
We got some pizza day in the transcript for it, so it might the YouTube overlords might pick us up a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, it's just a good example. It's a good thing to remember, just kind of, going down the pizza road a little bit here. I think it's important for people to note that at that time, there was a ton of supply. There was hardly anybody using it. That's what it was worth. Just like today, I think Bitcoin's extremely undervalued right now. But at that time, that's all it was. And I think that that's how people should be thinking about transacting with Bitcoin. This week, we saw Steak and Shake accepting Bitcoin now. And there's people like well, I'm not spending my sats on a burger. But you're looking at this the wrong way. Either way, whatever you pay with, dollars, sats, gold coins, whatever it is, you're sending somebody value. You're giving somebody value for something that you're buying. Because even if you bought a steak and shake with dollars, that's $20 that you didn't buy Bitcoin with. So it's the same kind of thing. I just think that that's important to kind of get across, because it is important to be using the stuff. It's a peer-to-peer network. It was designed to be spent, and that's what the powerful thing about Bitcoin is you can hold it yourself and you can send it without permission. So I just kind of wanted to throw that in there to round things out here, boys.
I think another thing that I'd like to just cover before the end of the video, I know we're coming up to 20 here. So I think, the cycles are really important with, thinking about how high it's going to go. But I think the other thing people are concerned with is how low can it go, right? So there's this idea of 3 up years, 1 down year with a bear market in Bitcoin. And, we talked about sort of, sorry.
Nope,
I'm good.
You're back.
I'm back. We talked about an idea of like this floor price being set by this underlying bid of corporations and whatnot. But I still think that we have the potential to have a bear market because of a self-fulfilling prophecy type idea of, if enough people believe there's a bear market, they will sell in anticipation of a bear market, which will create the momentum downwards for that. Now, there's also sort of the counter trade of people expecting that, and then they'll be buying the dips because they'll expect the exact opposite to happen. Because when something is known with trading and with prices, then the opposite can happen, because it tricks those people out of those positions basically, and people profit from that. So there's a little bit of game theory, a little bit of sort of trading games playing out. We'll see. And in my opinion, to really avoid a full bear market, we'll need to continue to see more corporate adoption, which we're seeing all the time. Potentially governments starting to buy Bitcoin and being a signal that this is a base layer asset. And I think we'll also need to see retail come in and actually understand what they're holding, because the problem with retail coming in is oftentimes they'll buy at the highs, and then they'll go down 10, 20, 30% as a correction happens, and they'll sell, and they'll actually create more selling pressure, so they can be part of that self-fulfilling prophecy of a bear market. So I think we do need to see a couple things to happen throughout this next year for a bear market to be completely unavoided. But I also think that the bear market will be muted, as we've seen a muted bull market as well, potentially.
So far.
Yes, so far. That's my thesis. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think I would echo most of that. I think that it's hard to say. I'm still expecting pretty big things for 2025. What that looks like outside of that, as Forrest mentioned, we might shoot up and then come down. I don't know if that's technically a bear market or not. I don't think we're going to go down in the dumps. So I just don't see that anymore. Again, the floor is too strong. The foundation's rock solid right now. There's way too much demand for Bitcoin, and it seems like we're running out more and more each day. So eventually it will be muted or non-existent. So that's kind of my prediction. It just seems like a lot more flat this time around. And I do see much more upside than downside. That's kind of where I'll leave it with. Rajat, final thoughts?
I think we covered it all. I think we're good.
All right.
Buy Bitcoin?
Buy Bitcoin.
There it is. All right. So thanks for another great episode here, boys. We got a QR code right beside Forrest's head there. That's the Maple Bitcoin SAT Fund, Lambo Fund, whatever you want to call it. It's a way to support the channel. You can like, you can subscribe, but that is the most meaningful way to do it. And it does not matter how much you send. We've had a couple of donations recently of 21 sats, 88 sats are one of our favorite numbers. And we appreciate all of it. So thanks once again, and I'll catch you on the next one.